Welcome back. Well, we all know adapting to change can be difficult. So today we've got some tools to help you mentally pivot during these challenging times.
Joining us now to help is professional counselor Christine Finnerty. Hey, Christine.
Hey,
Hi,
Christine.
how are you?
I'm doing good. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I think it's so tough right now. We're dealing with the virus, and even if you haven't been sick and don't know someone personally who's sick, you're worried about it. You want to respect other people's distance and what level of caution they're comfortable with. And then we've got civil unrest. This is such a tough time, I think, for people mentally. And we hear that depression and anxiety and suicide are all way up.
They are. I think it's because we're being called to move and flip mentally from one thing to the next, because everything is, like you said, changing so quickly right now. And it is causing anxiety, definitely, to ramp up.
So what does it mean to pivot? When we say mentally pivot, what does that have involved?
So it's really very, very similar to the mental expression of to pivot. It is basically to shift perspective from a central point. So really it's helping clients learn how to quickly move and adapt and to shift their perspective rather than just their position.
So how can we mentally shift, Christine? How do we change our perspective and have a new paradigm?
Yeah, it sounds simple.
It does sound simple. It's hard. It takes work. Anything that requires us to continually move and shift perspective over and over and over, it takes time to adapt to that. And there are skills that we can learn that help us to be able to mentally pivot and to find some comfort in being able to do that.
So how do you do it? When you talk to your patients and your clients, how do you teach them to actually pivot?
So that's a really good question, because a lot of what we do in talk therapy is talking. And I think it's really helpful to use any kind of physical exercise or movement to be able to create a metaphor for what we are requiring our brains to do when we mentally pivot. So when we talk about mentally in my office, when we talk about mentally pivoting, I ask my clients to get up and to literally stand and to scan from left to right the landscape in front of them. And then I'll ask them in any way comfortable to turn and to shift and to pivot, and then rescan the environment in front of them, and then describe to me, beginning with what is the same, describe to me what they see that's the same, and then introduce slowly what is different. And then we go through this exercise a series of times, which allows them a physical expression of what we require of ourselves when we have to mentally pivot.
I like that physical cue to make a switch or to recognize a change. How else can we mentally pivot once we do the physical part, that first step?
So it's really important to understand that once you pivot, you begin by focusing on what are the things that you see that were the same. Because in times like COVID, these changing times right now, everything is very unpredictable. And when things are unpredictable, our anxiety goes up. So we need to be able to land on what is familiar. So when you scan the environment in front of you, you really want to stay with the things that provide comfort, safety, and security. And those are the things that are familiar to you. When you can find things that are familiar, you end up being able to meet the differences, anything that is new, challenging, changing, with a little bit more resiliency than you might have if you just were constantly going from one thing to another.
Is there anything you should say to yourself or specific types of thoughts you should try and give yourself to help with the pivot?
Well, it's really staying focused on the positive. So again, it's finding comfort in what is familiar. So you're telling yourself, I've been here before, I can do this, even though COVID has thrown this curveball toward us. The curveball is still, in truth, probably going over home plate. So it's in the vicinity of what we have, what has been familiar to a certain extent. So the world hasn't turned completely upside down, but it has changed. And so we're really focusing on look for the skills and the positive attributes that have gotten you this far. Look for the things that are going to provide you comfort, and then begin to move forward and understand how to tackle the things that look really different.
How important do you think it is to accept something less than perfection? So, for example, I'm tired. I'm going to take a nap. My house isn't as organized as I would like it to be. Maybe that's okay. Maybe I've put on some weight and I'm bummed about that. But maybe I can lose it once I can get back to my exercise class, kind of lowering our expectations of ourselves.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good question. And how do we talk to ourselves about that? Because COVID has really created a new sense of time. We've lost our structure and we've lost our routine because all of the things that we used to leave the house for, school, work, friends, meals, activities, exercise, we can do from our home now. And so it really has sort of flexed our sense of structure. And therefore, it's driving our motivation down and it is driving our fatigue up. And so oftentimes I hear from parents who are bringing teens in that they look like they might be depressed. They look like they're sluggish. Their motivation is really low. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're depressed unless you have difficulty getting through everyday ordinary activities every day for a period of about 2 weeks. Then it's time to come in and talk to someone like me. But this has created a new time and it has created a new structure for people. So I would expect it's normal to feel a little bit more sluggish. It's normal to feel a little bit more run down, and don't expect too much
Christine,
of yourself during
thank
this
you
time.
so much. We're going to be going to a satellite in just a little bit. I hate to cut
Yeah.
you off because I love
That's
what you're
okay.
saying. It's so important. Thank you so much for joining us today. Some
Appreciate
great
it.
information about pivoting. And you can watch our website, themorningblend.com, to learn more.